Dear viewers, thank you for joining me in the latest episode of Manitowoc History Review. Today, we will be reviewing the history of Dick Brothers Bakery, which for many years occupied a large area in Manitowoc's downtown north side. I'm sure many area residents can remember seeing their many bakery trucks making their daily deliveries not only to local stores, but to stores throughout the state. The story I tell will be of their beginning and their very sad ending. So here we go.
For almost 80 years, Dick Brothers Bakery, located in the 300 block of North 8th Street, was an essential industry in the city of Manitowoc. It was operated by Hector and Jerome Dick, who grew the bakery from a small one-room facility into one of the largest bakeries in the state of Wisconsin. So, just who were Hector and Jerome Dick? Hector was born October 16, 1879 at Hoogledge, Belgium. Jerome, the younger of the two brothers, was born March 24, 1884, also at Hoogledge, Belgium. They were the sons of Jacobus and Juliana Dick. In 1906, the brothers immigrated to America looking for new opportunities. They settled in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where they obtained work in a bakery. It took 4 years, but they learned the baking trade and learned it well. In 1910, they heard of a bakery for sale in Manitowoc and decided it might be time for them to set out on their own. The brothers came to Manitowoc and looked over the Chapman Bakery, which was located on Buffalo Street at the time. They had a decision to make, as at the time there were no less than 18 bakeries in the city, with most of those bakeries small family-owned businesses with limited sales. After looking over the Chapman Bakery and the city of Manitowoc in general, they decided the location was right for them. To keep things simple, it was decided that Jerome would head the bakery, but both men had an equal say in how the business was run. Their first few years of operation was kept simple. Each day they would bake their goods, place them in covered wagons pulled by a horse and driven through the streets of Manitowoc, announcing they had fresh bread for sale. Housewives liked the idea, as they did not have far to go to obtain fresh baked goods for their daily meals. The idea of home delivery took off, and between 1910 and 1919 the bakery run by the Dick brothers continued to grow. That was until December 6, 1919, when tragedy struck the Dick family. On that day, Jerome Dick was working with a salesman that supplied equipment the bakery was in need of. This was late Saturday afternoon when the salesman mentioned he needed to catch the 6 p.m. Chicago Northwestern train to his home. It was only a couple minutes to 6 p.m., so Jerome offered to drive him to the train depot. The two men jumped into Jerome's vehicle and headed for the train station. To get to the station, they had to cross over the bridge to the south side of Manitowoc. In the city of Manitowoc in those days, both the 8th and 10th Street bridges were turnstile bridges, meaning they turned in the center, leaving a large opening on both sides of the street. For whatever reason, the city never bothered to place any type of crossing arms at that point to stop traffic from going into the river. On this particular evening, a car ferry had just passed through the bridge, and the bridge was still open. Jerome Dick was in a hurry and did not notice that the bridge was still open, but the salesman did and shouted a warning to Jerome. When Jerome realized what was happening, he applied the brakes on his vehicle, but it was too late. As the vehicle started its fall into the river, the salesman was thrown onto the apron of the bridge and received only minor injuries. Not so for Jerome, who was thrown from the vehicle as it entered the water. He went under and did not come back up. It took several hours, but his body was finally recovered. It was found that he had sustained several deep cuts to his head caused by either ice in the river or the vehicle falling on him. Jerome left behind a wife and 2 small children and his brother Hector Dick to run the family business. Hector was also a capable businessman and went about running the business smoothly and efficiently. Their main sales store was then located off North 8th Street, and the main bakery was located off Buffalo Street. In 1921, Hector purchased a large lot to the rear of their building that gave the bakery an area to expand the business. Sometime during the next few years, the bakery stopped using horse and wagons to sell their bread and other bakery products. They sold out of their store on North 8th Street and delivered their product to the many small neighborhood grocery stores that dotted Manitowoc, as well as stores in small villages in the county. In 1923, their main product was called Mother's Bread. It sold for 10 cents a loaf, as well as coffee cake and raisin bread, which sold for 15 cents each. The next major change came in 1934 when Dick Brothers acquired the equipment to produce sliced bread. Of course, The housewives loved this as it now required little effort to make sandwiches for their husbands and children, but the sliced bread also required special equipment to wrap the sliced bread. Also, 1934 was the heart of the Depression and people had little money, especially for fancy treats. It was the habit of Dick Brothers employees to put some of these items outside to cool before wrapping them for sale. It was not unusual to find some of these items missing from their cooling rack to the point that the police had to be called to keep an occasional eye on the area when items were put out for cooling. That same year, Dick Brothers employees established their first union. This too was an effect of the Great Depression. Dick Brothers, like many other employers in the area and country, were reluctant to increase employees' salaries. The union forced this to happen. With the union, the employees received an increase in pay and less working hours. Beside bread, Dick Brothers' staple, the bakery also produced cookies, donuts, coffee cakes, raisin bread, cheesecake, frosted shortcake, potato bread and pies which came in cherry, apple, blueberry, raspberry and several other flavors. They also produced seasonal items such as hot cross buns during Lent and fruit cakes for the Christmas season. The fruit cakes were a favorite of many and had to be ordered long before the Christmas season. In 1934, a dark 1 1/4 pound fruit cake cost 75 cents and a light 1 1/4 pound fruit cake was priced at 60 cents. During World War II, many of the ingredients needed to produce the many items Dick Brothers would normally bake were in short supply. Mainly this was because of rationing which affected the whole country. In addition to flour, another item in short supply was poppy seed. Before the war, the poppy seed was imported from Holland and Poland. Because Germany had control of these two countries during the war, poppy seed did not make its way to America. Hector Dick stated he planned to discontinue the use of poppy seed on rolls and buns and cut the quantity in half when using it on bread and cake. It is unknown if they found another source of poppy seed until after the war ended. Hector Dick would see the company expand from horse and wagon delivery to a fleet of 12 modern delivery trucks that traveled hundreds of miles each day to deliver their bread and bakery items, with the bakery doubling in size to no less than 53 employees. That all changed on September 10, 1950, when Hector Dick unexpectedly passed away at age 70. His loss was felt deeply by his family and the company he oversaw. One can truly say that Dick Brothers Bakery was a family business, passing from father to son. With that in mind, Oscar George Dick was brought into the family business shortly after completing his education. He would work his way up to vice president of the company while learning the different aspects of the baking trade. Oscar was 24 years of age at the death of his father and without delay took over the daily operations of the bakery. During his presidency and leadership, Dick Brothers Bakery would grow into one of the largest independently owned wholesale bakeries in Wisconsin. One of his first actions as president was to purchase the property of the Brandt Printing and Binding Company, which was located at 817 Chicago Street, just to the north of Dick Brothers' property. This area was to be used for truck and garage purposes and general storage. At the same time, a new heating plant was installed. The purchase of the property gave Dick Brothers a continuous building running from Chicago Street to Buffalo Street, with their retail store located in the 300 block of North 8th Street. That same year, Dick Brothers purchased the routes and trucks of the Kelly's Bakery in Oshkosh, and in 1953 they purchased the routes, trucks and equipment of the Sindelar Bakery of Manitowoc. More important, that year Oscar oversaw the purchase of a machine that automatically sliced hamburger, hot dog and brat buns. The process also required special open-ended baking pans. After cooling, the buns were sent, pan and all through the machine, which sliced the buns uniformly. The buns were then wrapped 8 to a package. The new machine could slice 1,000 buns an hour. Without a doubt, the new machine was a major cost saving to Dick Brothers and labor saving to anyone that was ever required to slice a large number of buns for a picnic or other event. Up until this time, all breads, buns and other bakery items had to be sealed in cellophane by hand. This problem was solved in 1954 when Oscar oversaw the purchase of a machine that automatically sealed bread and buns in cellophane wrappers without the aid of human hands. The package of bread or buns was then automatically heat-sealed to preserve their freshness. Once again, this was a labor-saving device that drastically cut the cost of production. Now one might think this would also reduce the number of employees needed to produce the daily output of bakery. But it did just the opposite. Because Dick Brothers could produce more bakery products at a lesser cost, they expanded their sales area, which increased their profits and caused a need for more, not less employees. After the acquisition of the Bohemian Bakery of Green Bay in 1956, all of the baking was done at Manitowoc, increasing plant output 50% and the number of employees increased to 110. Drivers covered about 2,500 miles a day delivering bakery in 12 northeastern Wisconsin counties. Within a year, their distribution system was expanded into the Milwaukee area and south, and their fleet of trucks began traveling more than 6,000 miles a day. This rapid expansion required additional equipment needed in the baking process. In 1957, a third oven was added as well as a new fermentation room, a second bread slicer, a cooler, and a 40,000-pound bulk sugar tank. Later, a new automatic donut fryer was added that produced 6,000 dozen fried goods per day. Also, around this time, Dick Brothers started doing promotions to enhance their sales. One such promotion was to include a general food recipe on the end of each bread wrapper. I'm not sure how the housewives would save these recipes other than to copy them onto an index card or in a notebook, if the recipe was really good, which I'm sure they did. Other promotions were to give away a free coloring book with each purchase of bread or buns, and in 1957 they offered a hamburger press for 41 cents with the purchase of a pack of hamburger buns, or a wiener steamer for 59 cents with the purchase of a pack of wiener buns. In 1959, Jerome Oscar Dick, then age 21, son of Oscar, joined the organization. Like his father before him, Jerome started as a baker's assistant and then onto other baking positions, learning the baking trade from ground up. He would go on to serve as director of sales and then president of Dick Brothers upon the retirement of his father. In 1962, Oscar's other son, Roger Hector Charles Dick, would also join the organization. He had attended Dunwoody School of Baking, studying baking and bakery management. Roger would serve as Dick Brothers' secretary. In the 60s, under Oscar's continuing management, Dick Brothers continued to grow. 1964, they acquired the Gerhard Quality Baking Company of Fond du Lac, and in 1966 they took over the wholesale route of the Heiss Baking Company, which expanded their routes to Kenosha, Racine, and Stevens Point. At that point, Dick Brothers covered most of Wisconsin and part of Michigan. During this time period, two of their best-known bakery products were wholesome white bread and Little Debbie snacks. Dick Brothers was the sole distributor of McKee baking snacks, which included Little Debbie snacks. They were brought into Manitowoc, loaded on their route trucks, and delivered the same as their own bakery product. Dick Brothers' last major expansion occurred in February 1971 when they acquired the Jaeger Bakery, located at Wausau. The Jaeger Bakery employed 60 persons. Besides Dick Brothers, Jaeger Bakery was one of the better-known bakeries in central Wisconsin and upper Michigan. This acquisition increased their total number of routes to 61 and brought their distribution territory to include upper Michigan, most of north and central Wisconsin, as far southwest as suburban Madison, and south as far as Kenosha. Their route drivers were covering 30,000 miles weekly, and they now had a payroll of 250 persons, which produced some 160 varieties of baked goods and an average of 225,000 loaves of wheat bread a week. Oscar Dick continued to serve as president of Dick Brothers until 1978. That year, the Heilman Baking Company of Madison, Wisconsin made an offer to purchase the Dick Brothers name and all its facilities. The amount they offered, well unknown, must have been quite substantial, as Oscar and Jerome did not hesitate to accept the offer. With the sale of the company, Oscar, then age 62, stepped down as president and into retirement. Jerome remained with Dick Brothers until 1980, when he moved on to other opportunities. From there, the story of Dick Brothers Bakery is both complex and sad. In the 1970s, Heilman's was best known for their beer brewing empire, had over time acquired a large number of small, but well-known breweries in Wisconsin and neighboring states. This was noticed by larger breweries in the country, and Heilman was accused of trying to monopolize the beer market. To avoid being charged with the Sherman Antitrust Act, which limited monopolizing a specific market, Heilman's decided to diversify into other areas. One of these was the bakery market, which would eventually include bakeries such as Dick Brothers. Now we have to assume that Heilmann's intent in purchasing Dick Brothers was to make a profit, as at the time of the purchase Dick Brothers was a very profitable business. But one can easily debate that statement, as it appears Heilmann made little or no effort to keep Dick Brothers in top-notch running order. Over time, those areas that were not making a profit were closed down or sold off, and very little or no effort was put into upgrading the equipment needed to keep the bakery running efficiently. In January 1986, Heilmann ordered Dick Brothers to stop producing pastries, stating that the 75-year-old facility would be too expensive to modernize. At the time, Dick Brothers still had 173 employees working of the company. This truly was the beginning of the end. The following year, 1987, Heilmann Brewing Company was to face its own problems. Alan Bond, an Australian-based corporate raider, began a hostile leverage buyout in an attempt to take over the Heilmann Brewing Company. While Heilmann's management rebuffed his efforts, Bond was ultimately successful in taking over the company. Unfortunately for Heilmann and other companies under Bond's control, Bond had purchased Heilmann's with junk bonds. When the junk bonds were found to be worthless, Heilmann Brewing Company was forced to declare bankruptcy in January 1991. This also brought an end to Dick Brothers Bakery Company, and what little that remained of it at the time was also included in the bankruptcy. Those employees that remained at Dick Brothers at the time were notified that the business would be closing completely. Over time, the assets of the business that still had value were sold off piece by piece. The building at 312 North 8th Street that had once been the main store outlet was taken down in 1994, and the other buildings where the baking was done were taken down shortly after. As stated above, a sad ending for a once prosperous and essential Manitowoc business. Oscar Dick would pass away on January 24, 1988, and his son Jerome Oscar Dick passed away on September 14, 2011. Both are buried at Evergreen Cemetery, Manitowoc. At this point, I would like to take the opportunity to relate two personal remembrances of Dick Brothers Bakery. In my younger days, I was a police officer on the Manitowoc Police Department. Being assigned to the midnight shift, I was often assigned to walk the north and south side beats, checking building for anything out of order. My favorite beat was the north side, as it was smaller and far more interesting. Now Dick Brothers Bakery did most of their baking overnight, so that the fresh bakery was ready for the route delivery trucks early in the morning. Almost every morning, around 3 a.m., a dome of moist air settled over the city, and as Dick Brothers baked away, the aroma of freshly baked bread and rolls filled the air. The aroma didn't just fade away, as it was trapped under the dome of moist air, so no matter where I walked it was there. It was like working in the bakery itself, and made walking the north side beat a most enjoyable experience, one I will always remember. My second remembrance was that of the Dick Brothers thrift store. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but yes, Dick Brothers did have a thrift store, or a day-old bakery store as we called it. The thrift store was located in the 300 block of North 10th Street. The process worked as such. Each day, the route driver picked up his load of freshly baked goods and set out on his route. At each store, he brought in the fresh bakery and removed the bakery that had not sold the day before. The day-old bakery was returned to Manitowoc and dropped off at the rear of the thrift store. From there, it was brought into the actual sales area located at the front of the store and placed on shelves for sale. Now these items could be purchased for about half the price of their freshly baked items. At the end of the day, the bakery that had still not sold was stuffed into 50-pound heavy-duty bags that had been used to bring in flour and other ingredients for baking. The bags were called animal feed bags, and you could select as many bags as you liked for $2 each. In my younger days, I was an avid rabbit hunter and always kept 2 or 3 beagles in a kennel in my backyard. In addition to the beagles' regular food, they loved Dick Brothers Bakery, especially the sweet rolls, which they would on occasion push each other aside to get at first. Now I must admit that as I unpacked the bags, not all the best sweet rolls found their way to the dog kennel. A few of the best, even though squished like a pancake, just might have found their way to my kitchen. As the old adage goes, you never know what you had until it's gone. Such is the case with Dick Brothers Bakery and its wonderful baked goods. Dear viewers, thank you so very much for joining me in this latest episode of Manitowoc History Review. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next episode. Stay well.